and a very warm welcome, Champa Magesh, President, Trainline Partner Solutions, and Niklas Andréen, President and Chief Operating Officer of CWT. Welcome, both of you. We are going to talk today about the return, the reinvention of business travel, all those rewords that we have loved during this last year. Recovery, of course, is one of them. And I just want to hear what you, what you're thinking about as we're looking forward to this return and recovery from where you sit in the industry. So let's start off just with your perspectives on the return of business travel. When do you think it's going to come back? What do you think is going to come back first? And, do you really think all of it is going to come back, perhaps more importantly? Champa, let's start with you.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much for that, Charuta. And I think it's great to join the conference here with everyone. And I would like to begin by saying it would be great to talk about recovery, hopefully in the future where the conference is in person, because I think that is the foundation. And in fact, the raison d'etre for business travel is connecting people from across industries to share ideas. And I think that's why every one of us who works in the business travel industry have continued in that industry for as long, because of the buzz that comes from connecting people. In terms of, looking into the crystal ball is a total crystal ball question. I think obviously you'd expect me to say this, the clue is in the name of our company. But I definitely think as we look ahead into the future, and particularly as you sit in the Pacific Northwest, I'm sure it's not lost upon you, that sustainability and the impact of climate change and how travelers think about climate change is going to have an impact on business travel. And that's over a long-term horizon. So even immediately post-recovery, as we look into whatever that new normal is, whatever that steady state is, that is going to be a factor that continues. And in fact, some of the research that we've literally released today suggests that factor of consideration of the environment has actually been amplified in a post-COVID world. So that's not getting diminished by any chance. In terms of the other factors that are at play, which I actually think it's a balance, where does this end up? But obviously, I am definitely in the camp that I think business travel will recover. Albeit maybe slowly and lag leisure travel. I think the reasons that will happen is because, number one, the other big factor that businesses are having to deal with at the moment is the future of work. There is so much of a debate, us as employers, and I'm very keen to hear what Niklas has to say on this as well, is we're all thinking about our staff, do they return to the office? How do they return to the office? What does future of work look like? And many businesses are looking to either a remote model or a hybrid model. Very few are 100% back in the office. That has implications, and dare I suggest this, an opportunity for business travel, because what before was a commute now has potential to become business travel. And so I think the market space for business travel is redefined, maybe shorter journeys, but also increases in terms of volume. So two factors I think definitely to take into account as we look into the future for business travel.
And I absolutely agree. I think sustainability has gotten a seat at the table in terms of when we look at travel going forward. So I think going forward, it's kind of the troika of cost, safety and security, and sustainability that's going to form a lot of decisions around travel. In general, similarly, I'm incredibly positive on the outlook of travel. And we're seeing some real positive signs in terms of domestic travel in the US. We're starting to see Europe, Australia, domestic travel is doing really well. And you're seeing other parts of the world where you're almost back at some of the levels you had before in the domestic travel part of it. In terms of the travel that's going to remain, of course, international travel will take longer. We're probably years away before we're back up at the normal rates. And a lot of that's going to come down to the governments finding agreements. They're all testing their way around the regulations, and we need them to get together and find common rules and common ways of traveling. I normally travel about 200 days a year, and I got the opportunity to go to the US in the middle of the pandemic. And it was one of the most stressful journeys I've had because there were so many different rules. Was it 48 hours before? Was it 72 hours before they had to get vaccinated? So I think we need to help the travelers and the companies understand those rules, because no one want to leave a traveler stranded. In terms of the actual travel, of course, sales meetings, service meetings, crisis meetings, all of that's going to pick up. And I think we've stretched the limitations of Zoom meetings, et cetera, to be able to handle those type of meetings. What I think we're going to also see is, I think the hybrid meeting is here to stay. The days where we would all jump on a train or a plane and, go for a 1 hour presentation on a 2 hour meeting, and that's all we did, and then we flew back home the same day, are probably going to be less of a focus for businesses going forward. I also think that we're going to see a slower recovery in terms of internal travel, where I think, technology has now advanced so much that training sessions and a lot of these you can do in a hybrid environment. But it's not all bad, because the hybrid environment allows us to include a lot more people. So I expect companies, rather than the top 100 meeting, may in the future have the top 500 meeting, but where 100 people are physically in place and 500 people join via web link like this. And that will help companies rebuild culture, because that's one of the things that I think has taken the biggest beating during the pandemic, especially for global businesses.
Yeah, I agree. And, it was interesting. Axel Heffer of Trivago made a point in an earlier session about this pent-up demand for business travel, and how he expects to see a spike as things start to open up, but then perhaps in the longer run, to the point that you both made about sort of hybrid and, having that mix of Zoom meetings and some things in person. So that's an interesting point. I do fall on the side of business travel returning because of the human connection part. It's something that we've all missed during this last year and a half. So talking about sort of changes and how travel will come back, I think one of the things that also kind of is playing on all our minds is, how will that travel be different in terms of what is really going to stick? Again, to Axel's point, some things will kind of just jump and then sort of settle down, so to speak. But on from a traveler behavior perspective as well, right? If we look at it from the other side, Champa, what do you think? Travelers have safety on their mind, right? Everybody's thinking, do I want to get into a crowded space? And trains are one of those modes of transportation, so are planes. Do you think sort of there's going to be an impact from the traveler behavior perspective on what modes of transportation they think about when they're making a decision?
Yeah, I definitely think that the third factor, and Niklas mentioned this, and you mentioned this as well, that travelers as people, like all of us post-pandemic, I think health and safety, but also wellness. And I want to stress the wellness bit, because there's the basic health and safety, which is I want to be COVID secure, I don't want to catch COVID, etc. But then there is also the mental health, the people wanting to be connected, having been isolated for so long. And these two needs are competing against each other, and everybody will fall somewhere along the risk spectrum. As we were waiting to join this forum, we were having that debate that it's a sliding scale on the risk spectrum, and so every traveler will make that decision. The other thing, and I've been looking at some, talking to a lot of road warriors. I was a road warrior myself, and looking at some of the anecdotal feedback. Again, a lot of travelers miss being on the road. It was their life, and they enjoyed it, and they did it for a reason, and they can't wait to go back. And they can't wait to go back, not just because of being on the road, but it's, they want to go back and establish those connections, have FaceTime with people. But at the same time, many of them have enjoyed connecting with their families, putting their kids to bed, being able to spend time with their families where they were living with them. And so, again, these competing priorities are going to drive traveler choices. What our research suggests is that the safety consideration actually trumps the sustainability consideration. So where 27% of travelers were looking at carbon footprint and sustainability, maybe double that we're looking at, is it COVID secure, for example, in terms of their travel choices. And so that is definitely a big consideration. However, when we look at transactional information, and Niklas made this point about domestic travel opening up, business travel comes in many shapes and sizes, and we generally tend to think when we say business travel about long haul international travel. But actually what we're seeing is business travel has already returned. Our data suggests that SME travel, which I very much see as the heartbeat and the lifeblood of business travel, is lagging leisure travel. So leisure travel is ahead, but SME business travel is a close follower on, and not just domestically, but in Europe at a cross-border level as well, which is hugely encouraging. And of course, it's very encouraging for us that these travelers are choosing train, which, obviously we would believe is a great choice, particularly for shorter distance journeys.
Right. And Niklas, I know you said that you have enjoyed not being on the road for 200 days a year, 200 days a year. So any quick thoughts on that? Because I would like to move on also to some other topics.
No, and absolutely. And I agree. And I think the well-being one is a key one, because, and I think that will drive more people to be part of the programs, because I know that, historically, you want to be treated as an employee when you're traveling. You're not traveling because you find it fun. You're being asked to go somewhere. And I think historically businesses kind of waved you off and hoped you came back. That was part of it. So I think now, both from a traveler perspective, you want the company to have an overview of where you are, to make sure you're traveling on the right sanitized places, etc. And as an employee, you want to make sure you can cater for all of your employees and take care of them, God forbid, should anything happen. So I think it's actually bringing the travelers and the businesses closer together in terms of common ground in when people go traveling. And I actually think that the suppliers, either rail lines, the airlines, the hotels, is the least of the issue, because they've done a fantastic job making sure they have safety protocols and all the rest of it. It's actually what happens when I'm at the location where I'm supposed to do business, not when I'm in the hotel, but when I'm walking back and forth or having dinner in a restaurant, etc. So there's big questions still remaining, but I think we have a common ground between employees and employers now, the importance of the travel programs.
Yeah, the duty of care aspect of it,
Correct.
And the suppliers definitely have placed a lot of attention on providing that confidence to travelers, I guess. One of the things that happened almost overnight was just this fall off in travel and the resulting impact of that, because the industry is very, very dependent on the transaction model, right? So having seen that, and we're seeing in the leisure space now this subscription models coming up as they try to, just maybe future-proof the business a little bit. So Niklas, what do you think from the TMC side? And some TMCs certainly have had, the cost plus model or tried a subscription model. Do you see that kind of gaining traction?
Well, I think the answer is it's not one model. We're going to see a lot of different models out that suits different clients in different parts of the industry. So you're going to see the traditional transaction model, and I'm sure people are going to tweak it and find ways of, making sure it works for both parties in a downturn like this, or an upturn on the opposite end of it. So you may have a reduced transaction fee as volumes go up, or you'll have an increased transaction fee as volumes go down. We have also worked with a number of customers on subscription models, as well as fixed and variable ones. And all of them have a time and a place. It very much depends on how the clients drive their programs. So for me, it's not an either or debate. We have to, as an industry, be able to handle all of them, because businesses out there are different, and you got to find a model that works between whether it's the TMC, the supplier, or the corporation, and bring them together.
And Champa, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think commercially it's very difficult to have a one size fits all. But one thing, there are two things that I think we can say without any debate. Number one, on the customer end of things, this was always the case in air, but increasingly now the trend in rail is the digital experience. It has to be friction-free, it has to be contactless, and so how does any retailer, a TMC, ourselves as Trainline, as a digital retailer, how do we ensure that we're bringing to the market more and more digital capabilities for consumers and digital tickets? And we've seen, for example, in the UK with the William Schaap's white paper, the UK government has put it as an objective to increase the digital tickets in the UK market. So in the rail industry, this is a very big trend driven by the consumer and accelerated by the pandemic. So that's on the demand side of the equation. For travel sellers themselves, as I talk to them, regardless of the commercial model, there are two facts that are evident, right? Sadly, due to the impact of the pandemic, travel businesses have less people. And as recovery happens, obviously, hopefully there's more business than they can handle, but they want to handle it because this is the opportunity that we've all been waiting for. So how do you bring in the productivity? How do you bring in the automation and the friction-free ability to process transactions, especially post-booking servicing? And how do you lower the cost of servicing? I think that's really important. But the second thing, specifically in my category of travel, which is rail travel, which I'm happy to say is where recovery is happening first because it's domestic or cross-border in Europe. It's not huge margins to begin with. So how do you ensure that you can be profitable in the way that you operate while taking advantage of the volumes? Because the key thing that I'm hearing from travel sellers is they want to be relevant to their customers. Yes, everybody's taken a massive hit to profitability, and it's been really horrific to see the impact of livelihoods in the industry. But what none of us wants to give up is continuing to be relevant to our travelers. So in that bid to stay relevant, how do we ensure we have the product offering and the technology to be able to make sure that travelers can still find use from the services being provided? These are what I'm hearing from travel sellers, that as being the priority as they look to recovery.
And I agree. The one thing I would say is I also see a shift in when it comes to the pricing from a discussion around transactions, because printing a ticket used to be the core competence in our industry. More and more with sustainability and safety and security, it's about taking care of the travelers. So how do you actually build for the service components and find a balance so you give companies what they need in that space?
Right. And, we have less than a minute left. So just in brief, Niklas, let's start with you this time. The two things that everybody in the business travel industry or, who's linked to the business travel industry should be paying attention to over the next few years.
Well, I think we've all learned that looking out for the health issues and having the backup plans for what we do. Because sadly, this is probably not the only situation like this that's going to happen in the future. I think secondly is employee well-being and health when they're traveling, and actually treating our employees as employees when they're travelers. When they're traveling, they're not travelers. They're still employees. They're not on a joyride. We need to make sure we as a business are there for them. God forbid should they get sick somewhere in the world and not be at home.
Okay, and Champa?
Yeah, well, being a commercial person, for me, as I think ahead to TMCs and travel sellers who are looking at their P&L and saying, how do I get out of this so that I recover as a business? I would put in front of you the huge opportunity that exists from offering rail to your travelers. I think this is the opportunity to accelerate. There were some statistics that we were looking at internally in Trainline where 80% of journeys in Europe are being made by car. Even a 1% shift of those journeys to rail would double the rail journeys across Europe. And the appetite is there. The appetite is there because of sustainability and some of the trends with the European Union committing to net zero, which has now been enshrined in law. So I think that the tailwinds are massive, and the opportunity for this to become a viable business is now. And I think travel sellers need it. So that's the first point. The second point, as we look ahead, is also around the the digitization and the cost of servicing and automation? How can you improve making content available, whether that is rail or air, in a more digital way, and so lower the cost of servicing? I think this is a key consideration for travel businesses.
Great. I love that you both had such different points to make. I think, we do have to learn to live with the virus, and to Niklas's point with well-being, and to your point on the supplier side, sort of just making sure that we are able to service at a lower cost while maintaining sustainability. So great. Thank you so much, Champa and Niklas. It was great to have you. Appreciate your being at the conference today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and stay cool, Charuta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.